Let's talk to Gohan here in Texas. Gohan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Doing all right under the circumstances. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to say I forgot you guys live in Austin, so I'm sorry for what either you guys or anyone you know is going through. So
yeah, very much appreciate that. They're on our mind.
Hanging.
So what do you got for us today?
Really just come into it. I want to discuss abortion. Chrissy, I've called, I think, twice before and spoke to you about this.
Yeah, no, I do remember a particularly bizarre hypothetical we got into a while back about a hypothetical woman trapped in a cabin with a police officer and a baby that wasn't her own, and whether she should be obligated to breastfeed that baby. We don't have to rehash all that now, but I do remember speaking to you in some of the interesting places that we got. Yeah, but no, what did you want to ask today? How should we frame all this?
Well, first off, that's a great memory. I had to do my homework last night and actually rewatch the videos where I spoke to you guys before. Otherwise, I would not have remembered it. But you got it like spot on. So great job. But if I could just really quick start, are you guys fans of dad jokes? It does apply to abortion.
It depends on the dad joke.
That is a caveat if I've ever heard one.
All right. I mean, I'm happy to give it a go. You know, I trust your discretions. I've never met you before, but we'll go with it.
No worries. This one definitely is a kind of a pro-life joke, but here it is. Dad and his son are having a conversation. The dad says, "Son, did you know an acorn is a tree?" The son says, "Really?" The dad says, "In a nutshell, yes."
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So is this an issue of personhood, of that question of like, what is a fetus? What is an embryo?
Yeah, so that's definitely a question involving personhood. When I have these discussions on abortion, I like to usually skip personhood and just go straight to bodily autonomy, since most pro-abortion people would say even if the fetus is a person, it still doesn't deserve extra rights. So I usually just skip personhood and just go straight to bodily autonomy.
Okay, yeah, so what's the point of contention here?
Okay, so the thing I want to get into is differences between organ donation, like forced organ donation, and difference between that and abortion. For organ donation, if I refuse to give my organ to some child, even if it's my child who's like having a heart attack or a bad liver or a bad kidney, if I refuse to give that to them, they don't die because I refuse to give it to them. They die because they have a bad kidney or a bad liver or a bad heart, XYZ. But
sure. And I don't want to be distracting or inflammatory, but I think it's worth pointing out that you have that right to refuse to donate your organs, even posthumously. That even your corpse has the right to not donate those organs.
I agree. And then, so after that, for an abortion, if I have an abortion, I'm just going to say fetus, because not all abortions are going to be like, I mean, maybe you can do an embryo, I don't know. But just going to say fetus for now. If you kill the fetus in an abortion, that fetus dies directly from the abortion. It doesn't die because it had a bad heart. There's a direct act of killing, where an organ donation, there is no direct act of killing. I can't be held accountable for somebody else's death because I didn't help them. An abortion, I can be held accountable because I didn't just not help, I actively killed.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a question of, did you actually pull the lever on that trolley to send it down that track? I get the agency part of all of this. Does that change the calculus for you?
Not entirely. It's like whether you pulled the lever or you hired somebody else to pull the lever so that it hits 5 people instead of 3. Like if you hired somebody else to do it, you're still held culpable for it. If you
Sure.
pull the lever, you still are held culpable. So in this example, the mother is not pulling the lever; she's hiring somebody else to kill her kid.
Okay. So, a couple questions really. And I find this a very interesting hypothetical, to be honest, because I think that's a worthy question of like, how many steps away from something can we be before we are not as culpable for it? Because I think that oftentimes within the abortion conversation, there's a discussion of, well, you chose to get pregnant or engage in things that would cause a child. And so I appreciate that you brought up, even if it was your own kid, like it's kind of a different situation. So I'm curious because if we live in a world where illegal organ markets exist, right? And it's not something that, we maybe talk about a ton in the US, but it is something that does happen. And so I'm wondering if you ended up in a situation where you were physically, someone was relying on your body to exist. This is a pretty common analogy with abortion, so I'm just curious as to what your answer is. You're tied to somebody else. You will survive probably, but if you were to say, no, I'm actually not consenting to this operation, I've been kidnapped, I've been hooked up to this other person to keep them alive, and you walked away, that would be a direct action that caused the death of the other person. So what is your take on that one?
Sure. And I don't know how much you guys want me to get into this because I've called in before about the violinist, but actually,
this is the violinist, right? This is the violinist.
Yeah, it's just a different formulation of it. Yeah.
So if I refuse, if I'm just going to go the violinist route. If I'm tied to the violinist and I walk up and eventually the violinist dies because I didn't stay for the whole 9 months because I have bodily on me. What does the violinist?
Could be 20 minutes. It doesn't matter.
I would be directly killing him. But it does, because the violinist would end up dying of, I think it was kidney failure or something. So the violinist isn't dying because I'm not helping them. They're already dying.
Okay, but
failure. They're requiring my help.
Yeah, that's kind of what it, I think that particularly when we're talking about abortion, you're saying they're already dying. Not necessarily. They're not necessarily dying if they get to use your body for the next 9 months. Then they're not dying at all. Then they're going to live.
We're talking about the violinist now,
Yeah.
not a fetus, right?
Yeah, because if we're thinking about you saying that they're already dying because of their bad liver, no, they're not. They're using your body. They're not dying. They will be dying if you choose to get up and leave.
So, if I'm removed from the situation, what would they, on their death certificate, what would it say they died of? Would it say they died of kidney failure, or would they say they died because Gohan didn't help?
I mean, it would probably say kidney failure, but what does an abortion have? What do they list there? They don't list because mom didn't help, So what do they write there?
Oh, as much as it's not because mom didn't help, it's because they actively go in and poison the kid before they take the kid out. So
is that what they write on the death certificate?
Yeah, I don't know if
is
that's
that what
an
they write on the
accurate
death
description
certificate?
of the procedure. But the result, it's not just that the result is the same. It's actually that the mechanism is the same, because the underdeveloped lungs and the entire system of the fetus is not able to support itself, is going to be reliant in that same way. That's why the metaphor, the thought experiment, works in this way. So we really haven't reinvented the wheel.
Ask a question?
I'm sorry, I missed all of
We didn't catch anything you just said.
Sorry, we didn't catch that. Could you repeat that?
Yes. Could I ask a question that might help y'all's argument a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, so I think a question that I've been asked is, what if we could take the fetus out without killing it, not directly kill it, and let it die? Is that kind of something you would be? Would that be a question you would want to ask or no?
I mean, it gets to kind of your initial thrust, which was around sort of the agency of cause of death and whether or not we're responsible for directly pulling the lever or equally culpable for not pulling levers and that kind of thing. I don't know that I don't know, maybe I'm being too literal and consequentialist about it, but if the end result is the same, I'm hard pressed to see that as like morally distinct.
I think I would also
Well,
ask at that point. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I would say if that is a route that's taken where you just don't kill the fetus but extract it from the mother, it's still alive when it comes out, and then you just let it die. I would say that's the same. That's very similar to like not helping the violinist because you didn't kill the violinist, and then you just let them die. So I would say that's similar. The only difference is this is your child, and until it can get help from somebody else to take care of it, it requires you.
Okay,
yeah, you created a moral framework.
Yeah, I think looking at this, a couple things. One, it feels like a distinction without a difference. It feels like it's an argument that can be made that these are, you know, at this point, we're splitting so many hairs. We're living in a science fiction reality when we're talking about having, if we can keep the child alive outside of the womb and then they can slowly die that way or something, like, okay, like maybe that's a thing we could do. It doesn't feel super relevant. So when you brought up your child living without you, being able to live without you. So I feel like let's bring it a little back to reality. I'm sorry, you can see my silly dog over there in the background. When we live in the system that we live in, we have very long organ donation lists. You know, it's your child. You mentioned you need to take care of them till they can live without you is sort of the vibe here. And so supposing you are the only person who can give your child that organ because it's a very long wait list, because you are the only match, the other parent can't do it, and you know they're not going to survive unless you do. Are you killing your child if you choose not to?
I would say no. And also, if you let the child die, the fetus die after you extract them, you're not killing them also.
Okay, then it just seems like life in general doesn't matter in this scenario. It just seems like a hypothetical shrug.
Yeah, I have to point out you've created a moral framework with this idea of removing the fetus and letting it die of, quote, natural causes, where you are increasing suffering while calling it somehow more moral than the original conceptualization. And that just doesn't resonate for me.
Sorry, I think I paused too long. So I wasn't 100% done. I'm saying that you wouldn't be directly killing the child then, but as the parent, you have a responsibility to your child until someone else can take that responsibility. So you wouldn't be directly involved. You wouldn't be the direct cause of their death, but you still have a duty to your child to not put them in an environment that they can't survive in.
Yeah, we're kind of redefining the argument a little bit and going to this notion that you are obligated to this violinist if that violinist is your genetic child. And so all of these other notions of action sort of shift because we are now making the claim that you do have a moral obligation to your specific children, which I don't, dismiss, but it is a different way of conceiving of what we originally started on. Is that fair?
Can we make the violinist my child that's like 5 years old? That way it kind of fits this situation a little bit better. So in that case, if I put the violinist or my child who is 5 in an environment that, like, let's say I stabbed their kidney or something, so now they need me to be hooked up to them for 9 months to make sure they don't die. If it's my child, I think that's appropriate because my child deserves protection.
Ooh, question. So, say you have a genetic illness that will compromise your kidney. You have this child anyway, and you are the only person who could potentially donate an organ. I'm looking at this sort of also like throwing this out there as we consider that we can't talk about abortion in a vacuum, right? Abortion has legal consequences in the world that we live in. So not only are you morally responsible, because I would agree, like I'm a mom, I have kids. I'm like, I think you'd be a pretty crappy parent if you're like, nah, I just don't want to get all those needles poked in me, let the kid die, right? That's terrible. Morally, should I be held criminally responsible for that? Because that's the world we live in here in Texas.
I think you should be held criminally responsible for any kid that you directly kill, unless you're at high risk of severe harm.
Okay,
I
so
think that
two
really
questions.
applies if you have a 5-year-old kid who's running at you with a knife,
Mm-hmm.
and for some reason you have no other option other than lethal force of self-defense. You can only use lethal force of self-defense if there's a high enough risk of severe enough harm.
If
So
you
either
choose
you or-
to have children, then knowing they're going to suffer, knowing they're going to need organ transplants that they're unlikely to be approved for, I think you could make a pretty good argument that you have chosen to make that child live and die a miserable life and suffer a miserable death. You made those choices that led to that. They would not have happened had you not made those choices. Should we hold people who have children in spite of knowing that they have genetic disorders that would cause these things, which is a very real scenario, should we hold them criminally responsible for those choices?
So can I re-ask your question in a way that's
Sure.
favorable to me, or is that too much? Okay.
So long as we could like examine why we would reframe it, for sure.
Sure. Okay. If you want, I'm just going to rephrase it and then we can go back to the way you asked it. But to me,
Okay.
It sounds like, would it be, which one is better to, like, less criminal offense, to allow your kid to suffer or be the direct cause of their death?
Wait, are you asking me allowing your child to suffer? So you're saying in this scenario, you are by choosing to have this child,
I would say
by creating that suffering. Are we still in that scenario where you have chosen this eyes wide open, or are we in a scenario where your child is suffering and you choose not to kill them? Like, can you specify for me?
My child is suffering. It seems like they're going to suffer for a week and then that's it. And they're going to die after that. I think it is less of an evil or less criminally bad. That's not the right phrase, but less criminally bad or less of an evil to let your kid live and go through the suffering and go through life instead of killing them before any of that happens.
I agree. That's a totally different scenario, though. Like, I agree with if they're going to suffer for a week and die, like, okay, but you're choosing to bring this life into the world, knowing it will suffer and knowing it will die prematurely, knowing that it's required to have this particular organ, and you're doing it anyway. And then we add to this question, what if you could save them with your organs? What if you have them, they have this genetic disorder, you refuse to give them the liver, so they're going to suffer and die. You made all the choices to bring them into this world. You did everything you would be doing in this abortion scenario, and then you're going to let them die because you don't want to give them your organ. So you created the suffering too, and you're choosing not to amend it. You're choosing to let them die here. Should that person be criminally liable? If you get a genetic test and you know your children will have this genetic disorder, and you do it anyway, do we arrest you?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question the first time. I'm sorry about that. But yes, let me answer this question directly. So, no, I don't think you should be held criminally responsible for not for putting your child in a situation like that, where maybe you could help by taking extraordinary measures, by donating your kidney. But I don't think any parent should be criminally charged for not taking extraordinary measures to help their kid.
It's
Okay,
hard to feel then that or it's easy to believe then that you don't believe that pregnancy is an extraordinary measure.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say that's. I mean, it's extraordinary, but it's a part of every single kid. Like every kid has had to go through pregnancy.
Well, every
That-
kid's parent has had to go through pregnancy. I think that that's something that maybe we have to point out, because the kids that we see that have gone through it, that are alive, are the ones who survived, right? And while that is a majority, because we live in a society that does have relatively advanced medical care, not every mom makes it through. Not every pregnancy goes to term. At this point, we are demonstrably arresting women who wanted the pregnancy and did have a medical procedure they had to have to continue living, maybe for their other kids. Like, I think that, yes, it's common. It does not mean it is not a major medical procedure.
It's common, and I take Gohan's point that yes, every person living had some experience of pregnancy, on the receiving end of that benefit. But as you point out, Sophia, that's a gigantic sampling error, and one that we really need to be reckoning with here.
So, like, I mean, I guess.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, what did you say?
Sorry, Christy. I was seeing if Christy could expand on his point.
Oh, really? I was just sort of
is...
highlighting something Sophia had said, which is that it's a gigantic sampling error to say that all people who are currently alive experienced pregnancy on like the receiving end, because as Sophia pointed out, all of the people who didn't get born were people who did not.
It's also kind of like let's compare it to another thing that's common, but also can be difficult. So this feels like a big jump to make, but at the same time, I'm going to do it because I think it illustrates the point. For YouTube gods, I will say CSA. Is that something you know what I'm talking about here, Gohan?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So CSA is actually extremely common. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are going to experience some level of CSA before they reach the age of 18. So I think it's imperative that we do something about it. I think it's important that we talk about this very seriously. It would be very easy to say, and I have heard people say this with their own mouths, so these are real people, that talking about it only makes it worse, and that really, like, everybody there's so many people who do survive it. It's sidestepping the question of those who commit suicide. I just might have upset the YouTube gods by saying that, but it's sidestepping the questions of the massive impacts it has on people's lives, because it's able to shrug and say, well, a lot of people survive. I would say that pregnancy and childbirth are very similar in that they're common. They're things a lot of people go through. And yet, this is sort of ignoring the fact that a lot of people don't make it, that it's one of the most dangerous things that one can participate in, even with the highest standards of medical care. And that pregnancy loss and loss of children within the first year of life is not only, not that uncommon, but it's horrifying. It affects you forever. And so to just say, well, a lot of people do it, it really is minimizing how impactful and epic this really is.
So if I was going to respond to that, I would say, yes, pregnancy is a dangerous measure. But my question would be, how dangerous can it get before you're allowed to use lethal force and self-defense? And
in Texas,
I mean,
the mom can die.
Like, let's say
like, that's just, we live in this state. That's the thing
that really is where we've drawn a lot of these legal lines, and that really does matter. Like, if we were to talk about sort of the ethics of when or how should abortion ever be appropriate, and whether it should be freely available to all women all the time, or whether it should be restricted to certain situations, perhaps involving rape or incest or genetic abnormality or danger to the mother, like, I think those could potentially be worthwhile conversations. but they have to be couched in an understanding of the world in which we live in. We can't just say some hypothetical ideal. We have to actually look at the way we value pregnancy in this country, at the access to medical care that we have available, at the societal resources that are or are not being offered to pregnant mothers and a lot of people who find themselves in high-risk pregnancy situations.
So if there is a high-risk pregnancy and it is like your life is on the line, then according to what I've said before, if there's a high risk of severe harm, you're allowed to use lethal self-defense.
I think that's
I
what's
just
written,
hope
but that is not reality.
That's not the reality of many
can't...
pregnant people here in the state of Texas, and there are even more draconian laws across a lot of this nation. And I think that would be certainly the first thing that we would start with, is that we need to amend those laws. I think anytime we talk about abortion, we have to get away from a strictly binary ideal of exactly what anybody should do, and rather create a suite of options that can be appropriate to any number of very intricate situations. And as Sophia pointed out earlier, be very mindful about the way we differentiate morality and criminality.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to jump in also and connect this a little bit, because I think it's really easy to say when we're just thinking morally, things that we would be okay with, or things that would operate within our system of morality and integrity, and not necessarily realize the impact that those things have. Say in general, we disagree with abortion. And so we do things like select policies that would make it illegal or harder to get, with these caveats maybe written into the law. That can feel really good. That can feel like it fits with our moral framework. But the law doesn't have our moral framework. We cannot write it specifically enough that we will agree with it in these moral ways in all circumstances. And so when we try to legislate kind of these feelings, this internal sense of integrity, we end up putting it at the end of a cudgel. The law is not a finely tuned instrument. The law is basically at best kind of an axe. So whether or not you morally believe that a high-risk pregnancy should be something that someone could consider having an abortion under, that's not really going to be reflected in the reality. That's an interesting moral argument, I guess, but it kind of doesn't really matter if that's still going to mean that we select things that make it harder for other people to get, or harder for other people to get abortions, because the upshot of that will be death on the part of the mother. We've seen that happen again and again. So it's kind of nice to live in a world where we're like, the thing I prefer to happen would happen. The way I would prefer for this law to be interpreted, it would be interpreted that way. We really can see now that that's not the case, though.
So I think I'm going to just respond to one thing Christy said and one thing you said, Sophia. But
for sure, we just threw a lot at you. So
Christy, I know you. You're good. Christy, I know you said like it shouldn't be such a black and white. Like there should be some room for exploration. But I think whenever it comes to discussing killing a human organism, we need it to be as black and white as possible. This is the line you can cross. This is the line you cannot. If you cross this line when you're talking about killing another human organism, you've crossed the line. And that line needs to be as defined as possible. And
yeah, I very much appreciate that point of view. When we talk about these slippery slope type arguments, I do think that anytime the question is, where do we draw the line? The answer needs to come down fucking somewhere. And I think I would put forward, based on what Sophia just said, that a idealized society would be one that removes criminality from the conversation and that puts these very complicated moral questions into the hands of pregnant people and their medical providers. How does that reality strike you? Is that not where you might draw your line, Gohan?
And this is that was kind of leading into my question with Sophia, because it sounded, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sophia, but it sounded like you were okay with what I said, except you don't think it's going to be practiced as said. and therefore you don't think it should be law, but you're okay with the idea of it, that you shouldn't be able to kill another human organism unless there's high risk of severe harm, and that should be held consistent throughout every human organism?
No, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I just didn't choose to argue with it in that moment. I mean, I think that that's a totally,
Okay. So
that is such a hypothetical that I also would bring it down to, like, I guess, if you're curious about my personal stance on it, I think that before a certain point, that point being viability outside of the womb, which I know is a squishy question, but that's where I personally would draw this line. I don't think there's such a thing as a moral, like abortion itself is not a moral question. There are moral abortions and immoral abortions. Chances are how you go about it would sort of matter. So, for instance, an immoral abortion may be one in which you are in every way wanted pregnancy going forward, having like a great situation, and then you choose to, abort the baby, which I conceptualize as a baby because I've had kids, but not everyone has to, in order to get back at your partner. That would be, I would say, an immoral abortion. It's not really about the abortion. It's about the motivation. It's about the fact you were doing this expressly to hurt people. So, I'm like, that's, I guess, would be an immoral abortion. But like a moral abortion could be one where you have 3 or 4 kids already. This is going to literally take food out of their mouths. You do not have the ability to support another child. You don't have the time to support that child. And you may want it, but it's just not going to be reasonable for you to take care of that. If that is really the best option for someone, I'd say that's a moral abortion. So I would say that there's not really like a line I draw on abortion itself beyond viability. And again, that's my personal line. I did a quite deep study on the concept of abortion for a while. And the place where I was the most surprised my opinion changed was actually in late term abortions, because I thought I was going to be against those no matter what. The more I got into it, looking into when they actually happen, who actually gets them, and the circumstances that they go through, I was surprised by how much I felt like those should be allowed. I thought I would have a really hard line there. It turns out it's pretty much always a very thoughtful decision undertaken by doctors. Doctors oftentimes refuse to do late-term abortions because they're like, no, I'm not comfortable with this. This baby's viable. I'm not going to do it. It's usually in really horrific circumstances where that was an incredibly wanted baby anyway. And by usually, I mean every single time I can think of. It's just I'm leaving room for a possibility that that's not the case. So, I guess I've also been surprised by my own opinion on abortion as time goes. This has been a bit of a rant, but you mentioned what I believed. So there it is.
Well, I appreciate that. I think you're the first host I've talked to on the various shows who has given a line other than birth. And I understand it's not a hard line for you because you're still seem to be okay with late-term abortion in certain circumstances, but I appreciate the honesty. And I would say, first off, there's no such thing as an unwanted kid.
That's not true. Sorry, that's not true at all. What are you talking about? I know multiple people personally who were conceived through rape. I mean, that's just, how is that possible that that's a wanted kid?
Somebody else would love that kid if they had the chance. I guarantee it.
Wow. Okay. I highly recommend you. Okay, I'm gonna just pause right there. I'm sorry.
15 seconds in our foster care system, please.
Yeah, exactly. 15 seconds in our foster care system. Also, our adoption system has a lot of issues. Even if that kid is technically considered wanted by someone else, it doesn't mean that they deserve to use my body if I'm raped to have their own kid. First of all, that's a really horrifying thought. And second, look up stories of adult adoptees. Adult adoptees will talk about their experiences as the adopted child, and they're oftentimes horrific. They will actively say they wish their biological parent could have had an abortion. These are not necessarily solutions. That's kind of like saying there's no such thing as an unwanted street urchin in Dickensian England. Somebody will put them up a chute to have them, clean fire flues. Somebody will use that kid. Like that's really difficult. At some point, if we extrapolate far enough, someone wants to use you to fill a hole in their life, maybe even pretend that you're their biological mother. But that's not a solution. And I highly encourage you to even also look up the death rates for adopted children versus non-adopted children. Like these experiences are different. And I'm not by any means saying every adopted family is bad and evil, but there is inherent trauma in adoption, and it is made light of very easily. And I feel like we're kind of on the brink of that. So I really would be curious as to your thoughts if you kind of engage with those stories of adult survivors of adoption. And I use the word survivors because that's what a lot of them use.
So two things. I've read the Turnaway study, and that was honestly like a good source, certain circumstances of, hey, this is how abortion improved my life, or hey, this is how abortion improved my family's like X, Y, Z. There's a lot of stories like that in the Turnaway study. I'm not going to pretend like abortion hasn't helped out people financially, or helped out families financially. I definitely think it can, and it has. But I think there's a lot of evil in the world that can also help out families. But as far as
like cutting Medicare,
adult adoptees, I'm gonna have to wait a couple of years. I have 2 adopted kids myself, and we'll see what happens when they get older. But for right now, I'm just going to try to be the best parent to them that they deserve. So
I almost feel even more so. Yeah. So I actually love that. I almost feel like even more so than because you are a parent of adopted children, the kids who have struggled and had the inherent trauma of adoption and still do talk with and are close to their adopted parents, it's because their parents started researching the system. And a lot of them mention, like these adult adoptees talk about how, yeah, their parents adopted them and then started to research the system and kind of realized some of these outcomes, and it actually made their adopted parents better parents who had more of an understanding of where they came from. So I get that it might hit like a little closer to home because for me, I'm like, the immediate thing I think whenever I learn anything about parenting, I'm like, oh no, did I completely mess up my kid already? Because I have a almost 1-year-old, and I'm like, right? They're so vulnerable. But I know it would be difficult, I'm sure, because I go through similar difficulty, but that might actually be really good for you to look into because you have adopted children, because there are parents who have done that, and it's been pretty good.
Correct. I know, like for me, when my kid turned 1, I was like, hey, we made it. The kid is still alive. We did something right. And then, but now that as she gets old, I might get a little emotional, but she has 2 older siblings that the mom kept. So I know she's going to have abandonment issues growing up because she's going to be like, well, why did she get rid of me? What's wrong with me? So I know that's going to be coming down the line. Or trying to keep an open relationship with the birth mom. Hopefully that takes away some of the abandonment issues. But you know what? Well, whatever she has coming down the line for her, we'll be there and we'll try to support her. But she's probably going to have some issues going down the line. But I think whatever issue she has, it's better than her being killed when she was in the womb.
I think that
and
I really
appreciate. Then
Sorry, go ahead.
That's the parent.
I think that that's where these issues become so hard. And I think it can be easy to minimize the major impact that abortion can have. It's and just say like it's good all the time and I believe in it all the time. It's also easy to minimize the major impact that I appreciate that you've read the Turnaway study, that not having an abortion can have. I think one thing I do want to put out to you is that the way you love your kids, what you feel for them and about them, is so often the way that women who have abortions feel about their already living children. It's not easier. They don't love their kids less than you love your kids. And they're still making this choice, which to me indicates it's more than just financial. I think we threw out kind of when you're like, yeah, there may be financial benefits, but there's financial benefits to evil things all the time. Okay, but let's talk about what the financial situation means for these particular families. That might mean, particularly as it can be hard to ensure that your children are fed and clothed, and we have less and less support for that over time, that might mean that you have active suffering on the part of these children who are already alive, who love you so much. And I don't expect this to change your opinion at all necessarily, because I think I really appreciate how much you're engaging with this issue, but I think I put it out there to just underscore that, yeah, I agree that it's great and wonderful that you get to have children you love. I don't think anything, I in no way want to discount that, but these women who do have abortions also love their kids too.
Yeah, if I can just bottom line it all a little bit, I want to say that I really acknowledge Sophia's point about the possibility of a, quote, moral abortion versus an immoral abortion. And where I really come down ultimately on all of this is that we ought to be removing the criminality of it and leaving those very complex moral decisions in the hands of pregnant people and their medical providers, who I hope are being taught through a incredibly complex series of medical ethics and are working very diligently to apply them in incredibly specific and difficult situations, and that we would build a society that offers support to these decisions and to these different types of opportunities, and that we take lawmakers who are incredibly disconnected from the situation and so often just looking for good sound bites out of the equation. Sophia, does that feel like a place that you'd feel comfortable coming down? Is that a good bottom line for you as well?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it surprises people how much I may morally oppose certain situations for abortion. That's a personal choice on my part. Like, that's how I feel about it. But because these are so complex, because these issues are so hard, because we know what happens legally and we see it more and more every day, when we've taken the ability to make that choice out of the hands of doctors, out of the hands of the women who are most impacted by this, and put it in the hands of the state, that I feel like because of the complexity, then it needs to be something individuals and healthcare providers select, not in spite of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so Gohan, can you kind of bottom line it for me and let me know where you're at here at the end of this call?
Yeah, I would say I brought up points for in favor of abortion for financial reasons. I know a lot of the times it's more of how can I feed the rest of my family, or even for the kid itself. This kid is going to suffer. I love this kid so much. I don't want them to go through with the suffering. Let me end their suffering now. I understand that, but I also understand a lot of evil in the world has been done out of positive thoughts for good. I think there's a line in it from Pirates of the Caribbean. Do you guys remember that movie? It's
yeah, definitely remember that movie.
When she's not.
Sorry, like, I have a lot of stories about that movie.
No worries. A lot of good things are paid. It pretty much is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So sure. Doing evil things like killing your kid can be done from a point of love, but in the end, that act is still evil. So
here's something I would say. I fully agree. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I fully agree with you.
Sorry, go on.
That I love quotes like that. I fully agree with you that a lot of good things can be done out of evil. I think that's exactly how I would describe our current abortion laws. There are things people who feel an immense amount of stress at the concept of abortion, who feel it's doing something evil. But as a result, we have created a situation where women and their doctors cannot make choices, and women are dying, or women are being permanently incapable of having children because they go through this really horrific process. Like, these are laws that I think may have been made with some very good intentions, probably out of love. And I mean, I think I love that. I love that line, but yeah, I would apply it to that too.
Yeah, I mean, when we get into the deontology versus utilitarianism type situation and debate, we do have an obligation to descend into the particulars and actually see what is happening. And we can see very clearly in the statistics since the Dobbs decision that marked harm is being caused particularly to pregnant women. So it's definitely a concern. Gohan, I really appreciate your call and you being willing to descend into some of these hypotheticals.
Yeah, and it was a very nice call. Sorry, I got a little emotional there.
No, don't be sorry. I love. I
There's a
mean,
place for big feelings.
yeah. I also I feel like
one
it
thing I
means it
learned
matters
about
to you.
sociology-
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, of course it matters. I mean, even if I didn't have kids, the idea that like either half of humanity, not half, but like 1 million of humanity is being killed in America, or 1 million pregnant moms are being forced to go through something they don't want. It's a bit, either I'm right, I'm saving kids, or I'm wrong and I'm hurting millions of women. It's a big question. So I really gotta try and make sure that I'm on. I have as good of understanding of this as I can get. I think discussing it with people who disagree with me is probably the best way to go. Reading things like the Turnaway study, and one thing I was surprised with the Turnaway study was it said it actually showed data for how, I'm going to say pro-life laws. I know you're not going to agree with that, but how pro-life laws
It's the term we use,
do
you know.
not support. Yeah, but like how it actually does affect. Like one thing I keep hearing is that all these laws won't stop women from having abortions. It actually does. It has a very real effect, and I think the overturning of Roe magnified that even more.
Yeah, I think you're actually right about, you know, like I feel like we could go on talking for days. This is a very interesting conversation, but yeah, I really appreciate the.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
And it's been a very good time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.